Welcome to our interview series on technology impact assessment, otherwise known as TIA. My name is Katina Michael. I'm a fellow of the Social Cyber Institute in Australia and also a visiting scientist at Arizona State University. This interview is part of the Australia-India Joint Impact Assessment of Critical Technologies for Peace and Stability. And it's a project that's been funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Australia, but also our Indian counterparts. And it's been ongoing since November 2024. In this series, we are focusing on technology impact assessment for peace and stability. And today we have with us Danil Kerimi, who is a member Independent Oversight Advisory Committee of WIPO, among many other things, and we'll get to hear about those in a moment. But as a way of introduction, Danil is an experienced tech and economic diplomacy, investment attraction, facilitation and protection, public relations and oversight professional with a track record of delivering impactful projects in corporate strategy, national, regional and urban competitiveness in developed, emerging and frontier markets. Welcome, Danil.
Thank you very much, Katrina. How are you?
I'm very well. And by way of introduction, I think I only touched on the first paragraph of a very long and very wide-ranging bio. Can you tell us more about your background?
With great pleasure. I was born and raised in Turkmenistan, Central Asia, so my home country is a little bit about a decade younger than I am. But that gave me quite unique perspectives on many things, technology included, as I've witnessed my country's transition from different systems. Joined the United Nations Terrorism Prevention Branch after 9/11, and for a number of years worked in strengthening international criminal cooperation to counter terrorism. That was the era when the international community was moving away from persecuting the crimes once they committed and towards more moving towards prevention. So financing of terrorism was a big topic, nuclear terrorism and so on. But as the market started to crash in the fall of 2008, decided it was a good idea to switch to the World Economic Forum to save the global economy. And there, where I really truly embraced the notion of the technical impact assessment and many topics that we'll touch today. After 12 years with them, including a number of years with the Centers for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which was a global network that touched upon some of the topics that we will be covering. I did work with a number of corporates, AWS, PwC, and currently I sit on a number of boards. One of them you have mentioned, the Independent Oversight Committee of WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization, but also the World Smart and Sustainable Cities Organization in Korea, Council of the Great Lakes region. It's a binational organization here in the US and Canada around the Great Lakes. Cyber BRICS project of Fundación Getúlio Vargas and a few others.
That's I'm going to say a huge background. I'm reading here as well. Previously worked with, of course, you just mentioned the United Nations, but Amazon Web Services. You also mentioned WEF and advised several industry groups, private public enterprises, and
Right.
IFIs. What is IFIs?
International financial institutions. So as part of some of my work, I worked with pretty much all of them: World Bank, Asia Development Bank, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, Caribbean Development Bank, all of those. And currently, by the way, I'm still advising the UN Office of the Digital and Emerging Technologies on their AI capacity building efforts.
That's a phenomenal background and provides us with a additional flavor here in this interview series. Many of our interviews have come from NGOs, not-for-profits, some who do advise to international organizations, lots of academics, of course, but I think for sure this was an interview that we had to secure with you. Um, Tell me now on your background, because you know, when you read this list of organizations out, and for someone who teaches uh, students from the ages of early 20s right through to their 50s, they would love a career in the space that you've sought after. But where do you start as a disciplinary background with that? Where did you begin? Was it economics? Was it public policy? And am I correct? You're currently finishing a PhD at
That's right.
TUM?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you're too kind and allowing me to speak about myself, my favorite subject.
Yeah,
but uh,
yeah,
first, and perhaps I should give a little disclosure. I'm speaking strictly on behalf of myself, so I'm not representing any of those institutions that I have
yes,
mentioned and I will be mentioning. But I, in high school, I was convinced that I will become either a neuroscientist or solar engineer. And just as the educational system was going through the transition, unfortunately, that was not available anymore for myself. When I finished finally high school, I decided and I picked to study in international law and public administration. I got the first degree in law, which is very different. For example, here in the US, you don't get the first degree in law, but then I did it kind of in reverse. The second degree was in international relations in Vienna Diplomatic Academy. The third degree was a specialized degree in international business that WEF was offering with a few partners, including INSEAD and a few other business schools, Wharton and others. And yes, indeed, I am finishing my doctorate studies at the Technical University of Munich. And basically, just since you mentioned that, this trajectory shows that although I try to be busy doing professional things, I also try to stay very close to the cutting edge because I do believe that academics provide a very, very long-term and useful perspective on many things that sometimes are not possible to do in your day-to-day.
yes. I think that's very true. In academia, we do have flexibility to work in fields that we feel are right, both through evidence and our own intuition. And it's wonderful to meet industry people who are committed to academia as a lifelong learner, which I'm going to call you. I don't call everyone that, but that is obvious to us and anyone listening. Um, do you consider yourself to be multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary? What's your take on how you present your views in different contexts?
Absolutely, all of that. Perhaps best summarized undisciplinary.
I haven't
I
heard that
say.
before.
But definitely, I mean, giving the background that I don't like applying just one lens to any problem I try to analyze, and that perhaps that's my both my strength and weakness because sometimes it does require you to actually go deep and take just one lens and analyze it an issue just purely from that lens. Um, in which case, it doesn't come natural to me. I like to analyze it from multiple angles, but you have to adjust depending on what circumstances call for.
Would you call yourself a translationist by any chance?
I do, yes. Well, less of a translation. There is more of I like to understand complex things myself, but in order for me to understand them, I have to present myself in the simplest terms possible. And as I do that, I like sharing that understanding, and it just so happens that people appreciate that as well sometimes because it's hard to a major scene of any expert is to go deep into subject and lose the audience, right, in the process. Since I do have covered many disciplines, so kind of it does come naturally to me to realize that you have to walk together to make sure that people are on the same page. Otherwise, it's just you will end up alone in the woods.
Tell us how your work, both present and past, and perhaps even into the future, relates to technology impact assessment.
I'm a huge technology optimist and realist. So I love technology. I would not be sitting and talking to you today if it wouldn't be for technology. Access to knowledge is a huge thing. People tend to forget when we deal with the challenges of technology, but just the fact that you can tap on all that global knowledge is something remarkable, and how quickly people can forget about it. So I'm a realist, but also at the same time, I'm also I never try to buy into the hype. So I don't like it. I try to stay away from it. In the moment I hear it, I'm becoming more skeptical. It has to come naturally. So very early on, I think I identified And it was, pre-Coursera, pre-edX, pre-online learning. 20 years ago, I identified technology as key challenge for the work that I was doing back then in counterterrorism, but also key enabler. So I tried to sensitize the international community about abuse of internet by terrorists, and that was 20 years ago. As well as try to deliver certain technical assistance through internet because that allows greater reach, democratization of technical assistance, and so on. So since then, I've seen that it is possible to change the system. I always had a great luck of working with smart people that accepted my suggestion, even perhaps they struggled to understand in the beginning what it was all about. But ever since, I just tried to push the envelope. I tried to take an issue, and I still remember when I had to explain to various colleagues, what cybersecurity was and why it was important, and so on. And then, they said, "Well, it's great." And then obviously it became really top of mind for many leaders. But I kind of trying to stay one step ahead, not 10 steps ahead, but one step ahead of mainstream to make sure that you're there first when people are ready to receive this message. That's how and again, you know, my current work is around quantum technology. Why? Because it's just fascinating. Why? Why? Because I don't understand it and I just want to learn more about it myself.
Yes, we have some leads from India in our interview series on quantum, and it's been fascinating to hear how they've learnt about quantum and educated themselves and continued to strive to understand its application within India and beyond. I'm not surprised. Quantum is attracting a lot of people's attention because it will be one of those, I think, revolutionary changes to our technology landscape and global landscape, just like the internet was, but perhaps even more. Uh,
Yeah.
with being an optimist regarding technology and that you love technology and technology impact assessments, of course, identifying both pluses and minuses, advantages, disadvantages, both negative externalities and benefits and so forth. How do you temper that enthusiasm? How are you a pragmatist and realist when it comes to the potential, the technological potential, particularly of emerging technologies? How do you harness that and how do you balance that?
I think again, and I'm speaking from pure personal perspective, it comes naturally to me because while I'm very tech optimist and like I'm also tend to have a Cassandra syndrome, so I always try to see what can go wrong. So I could be perfect chief risk officer in an organization. It comes naturally to me to realize to say, okay, you take and perhaps contradictory thinking in a way that I take a claim that somebody makes and I try to unpack it and say, okay, you're saying that this will be the best thing ever since the sliced bread, and here is 20 reasons why you're wrong. And by the way, I do that the other way around. When people just say, oh, everything that could go wrong, I say, yes, true, but there is also the side. Here's the upside that you're forgetting about it. Now, having that calculated discussion, weighing pros and cons, and constantly recalibrating, because one other thing is people often forget about technology. They try to make a decision, right? Very often they get into decision making. Okay, I have to decide, is it good or is it bad? I have to make an investment, or I have to make a decision making. And instead of decision making, it have to be continuous kind of trying to figure out what it is about, because it's not like you made a decision and now everything will be great or everything will go down the drain. It's decision will only get you to the next step. That's when the next decision has to be taken. So the whole set of questions that you have been asking yourself and struggling with will have to be repeated. So it almost kind of has to become a second nature, right? And you which is hard for many leaders as well, because not only you have to do it personally, you have to then do it with your team, because the team looks at you and they say, okay, well, didn't you tell us last month that it was this, we're going this way? Yes, that's true, but here's a new set of data, we didn't look at it. And if you do train your team like that, actually they will be the ones doing that to you, to say, look,
Mm.
I know I'm not, if you don't do that, by the way, they will be afraid to contradict themselves. They will think that they just have to stick to the same argument they told you a month ago. But if you yourself do that and encourage that, they will come to you and say, look, I know I said this, but now I have a new data and I'm actually tend to lean to another conclusion. And that's what technology assessment is for me.
That's fantastic. I think people fear disagreement and conflict when it comes to discussions about topics. Um, Academics are renowned for disagreeing, of course, and seeing things from very different viewpoints. But it's very good to have that among your team. It's healthy, actually,
Yeah.
Danil. So I'm in total agreement with you. Something that's just struck me in listening to you talk so openly. But we always say as academics, really, when we look at the context of a technology within a system, for example, we say, but it's not about the technology. And yet
Mm.
here we are talking about technology impact assessment. What are TIAs really about, Daniel?
Well, to me, technology impact assessment is about trying to make sense of the world as you want it to be and as it is today and as it could go if something goes wrong. So yeah, and you're absolutely right. Yeah, all the disagreement and looking at it, it's great unless it paralyzes you, right? The paralysis by analysis is a very real thing. So at the end of the day, there has to be a decision, and sometimes decision ideally should not be something where you just get tired of arguing, but it has to be some sort of an agreement to move forward. One of the companies that I work for is very famous for having this disagree and commit principle. So that's I really like it. I try to I always been practicing it without necessarily articulating that way. But my yeah, if you look at any phenomena in this world, it's great when it's helpful and it's bad when it's not, right? You look at the fire is great, it gives you warmth, it cooks your food, but if you get burned, all of a sudden it's the worst thing. That why would we ever use the fire? In my mind, many technologies are similar, and people just have to be cognizant as they make their mental models about their impact. So again and again, you look at tech, and people are very very happy about it when everything goes well, but something when it doesn't, all of a sudden it's a fault of the technology. Is it? Perhaps because some design principles are designed in a way that tech is that way and the only that way. But yeah, the human element technology would not be possible with a human. We are the ones making the technology for now. Who knows what will happen in a few decades time, and how technology trajectory will take off, where it will be non-human element creating those technologies.
When you look at your work and you look at strictly TAs, technology assessment, or TIAs, technology impact assessments, is there something you do that reminds you of TIAs, but is not known as a technology impact assessment? Have you seen other types of assessments or other types of frameworks or approaches that remind you very much of what a TIA is, or do you think TAs are distinct things?
Well, in my mind, TIA is a very useful mindset. It's like it's almost a tool that you could apply. Right now, it's very popular to talk about sandboxes or guardrails or this and that. At the end of the day, it's all about responsible tech deployment, right? And I think to a certain extent, people were doing TIA even long before it was called TIA, right? You kind of tried to assess what it was like, why do we need it, how will it work, what impact it will have on society. We do have a tendency, I do believe that we do tend to have a tendency of overestimating the impact technology has short term, but underestimating long term. Because one thing another thing is it's technology is in a way very similar to biological system. It's evolutionary, and every gene that you put in will influence what comes next. So today, we talk about AI and quantum, but in a way it's still being influenced by technological choices we put 50 years ago, right? In the same way. And I'm not talking about those examples of where the size of the rocket engine is dependent on the quartz, and the size of the horses cart and all that. Not those stories, but in a way it does influence, unless you have to say, look, we design it from scratch and we'll try to do something. But those seldom do happen, those very kind of intentional let's forget everything we've been done before and come up with something completely new. And even then, you still have to use tools that have been, results of technology choices made by someone else.
In a recent interview we conducted with Glenn Withers, we talked about this very thing, and he's an economist by training, and it is evolutionary. Uh, it is a li living system in some way. It requires certain things to come together. Let's call them stakeholders in order
Yeah,
to produce something, to do something, and knowing how those systems of innovation work intimately,
yeah.
provide us a lens of how we can perhaps stifle an industry or let it flourish by injecting certain um, influences in that system. But I do believe it is evolutionary, and there are many papers in evolutionary economic theory which describe exactly what you just noted to us, that they are systems and they take on their own technological trajectory. There are lots of technologies in the selection environment, and depending on the context, we choose and go forward. I want to go back to a point you mentioned backgrounds in, of course, counterterrorism. You mentioned the importance of cybersecurity for nation states, keeping ahead of the curve. Now we have the introduction of AI in cybersecurity, for instance. How does TIA have a role to play in peace and stability?
This is an excellent question. I think it does help. Ever since the introduction of revolutionary technology in kind of security and defense environment, there's always this debate: will it help offense or will it help defense? Right? Even that is helpful to redefine how people are viewing it as technologies. Because very often, as a policymaker, again, you can either jump the gun too early, or on the contrary, you get so enamored with the marketing vision presented to you by the industry that all of a sudden you forget to do your proper job in assessing the risks. And again and again, there were examples where TIA could have done a better job at different stages of social media. When everybody, from Arab Spring, and everybody was enamored, there were voices that were saying, "Look, this the very same characteristics that you just described that allowed those regimes to be toppled will actually, easily can be turned on upside down and utilized by a different set of actors." But those voices were either ignored or not given enough prominence in this debate. So similarly, right now, I think that it's and it's I also know that there's would like to know is that there's a great deal that needs to be played by the media, because a lot of it is media driven, right? You just get the latest headline, and then debate shifts from AI risks to AI opportunities to AI job displacements to AI impact on the evolution of international financial system, this and that. And a lot of it's also driven by kind of people stuck in their own little bubbles without necessarily realizing that there are 6 billions that just not part of this debate, that would not have the same type of view. And sometimes that view would be completely negative, but sometimes very positive. It's just, they're not part of this conversation.
It's interesting. Some of our interviewees have come from developing countries where, for them, technology is for global development, and without it, they will never get out of the situation that they're currently in economically. So it's been very humbling to see very diverse views from interviewees from different parts of the world. And you have had so much experience uh, in these regions, emerging in frontier markets, for example, and so many more. What have you seen as the promise of tech in these nations undergoing global development?
I mean, everybody's talking about leapfrogging, right? And this and that, but sometimes leapfrogging does not necessarily mean just capturing the latest and greatest, or just riding the wave. Very often, it's just rediscovering something that was long forgotten. I mean, the good example I always use is the QR code, right? Coming out of the Boston labs in '50s, And all of a sudden, in early 2000s, Chinese mobile money ecosystem is enabled by this. And we here in the West rediscovered the QR code only during COVID. It's in a way revenge of the very old technology that was long forgotten, but somehow find its way in daily lives of many, many people. I wish under better circumstances. But at the same time, again, that's where again I think many technological systems have some biological evolutionary nature to it. Is that it's a good gene is born. It could be killed within the next moment, or it could flourish and bring the fruits later on. Similarly with technology, it's not just the best technology that always wins. It's a connotation of millions of actors, from economy to policy to technological competitors, and you never know what will really materialize 20 years down the road.
And how do you explain that phenomenon? I mean, we can talk about timing, the market has matured, there's a great need, there's this and that. How do you see it? Or when something just goes bang and just flourishes, what is that magic that allows that technology to serve a market?
Oh, it's very different. I don't think there's a magical formula. I think in some cases it just takes one stubborn individual, literally just one stubborn individual who realizes the potential and just then keeps banging his head against the wall, sometimes for many, many years, to say, this is what we need to be doing. This is what needs to happen. You know, um, Carthago has to be defeated in a way, right? So that's the message over decades. Sometimes it just takes, like a forest fire, because it's just easy. It's easy, or it's pleasant, or it attracts the attention. But again, it just as a forest fire, it can be, or bushfire. It can be very fast, very disruptive, but it will burn out by itself. Or in the country, if it's some sort of a long-term project where by individual or by corporate or by government efforts, it just takes years to dig a channel for irrigation, but then it really stays there for a very, very long time and feeds the ecosystem throughout decades.
Thank you. Fascinating. I know lots of students constantly are asking this question because they are working for organizations, particularly MBA students, that need to see a tech flourish so that their business flourishes. So they are advocates, obviously, from the inside. Um, Tell us, going back to technology impact assessment and the elements, what do you like to see in a TIA, both when you conduct it or in studying other people's TIAs? What are the elements of a TIA?
Well, there are different dimensions to it, right? There's a technological, economical, political, social. There's what I like to see is really well written or well presented document, or it can be visual. Yeah, it depends on. It has to tell a story, and it has to tell a story, at least to me, where it's not kind of as Kissinger say, here are the three scenario, knowing there's only one actually scenario that is being presented, but it's actually really say, in a very, very unlikely event of X, it could lead to these consequences. In a more likely scenario of why it can lead to that, and then also think through, um, and that's where to go back to the start of our conversation, different disciplines need to be involved, because they will think from different perspectives, right? What impact on the labor market, what impact on teenager mental health, what impact on this and that. Those are very different mindset, and different people will not even think about asking those questions. You first have to ask the question, then you have to question the answer, then you have to ask another question, and so on and so forth it goes.
In terms of methodology for data collection, providing evidence to TIAs, what are those key methods? You mentioned scenario planning, or the scenario methodology. What other methods do you think are key?
So the obvious ones are very good, like talking to the experts, literature review, and all of that. But what I myself, and this is my personal bias and preference, I like to talk to non-experts. I really like to talk to very simple and in many cases it's hard in TIA field, but if you do that conversation in a very simple way, the insight that they will provide to you is actually very often much better suited than expert opinion. And what I mean is not to diminish the expert opinion, but expert opinion is the is the result of either very similar growing up in the same type of expert environment or reading the same type of materials. So it often builds on a consensus rather than on contradiction. And the common sense is sometimes and I apply that actually across the field. Every time I take a taxi, every time I take an Uber, I talk about politics and economy and everything because their insight you don't read about it in the newspaper, but they provide. And that was a great, for example, learning for me because a lot of Uber drivers and taxi. And here I'm going to say maybe have something slightly controversial, but here in the U.S., they were all kind of saying what we learned about the government of Bangladesh years before it became public. But experts were not involved in that conversation. So I'm not saying that you have to believe what they say anyone says, or you have to follow it, but that interaction perhaps will lead you to ask questions that otherwise you would not.
I do think the emphasis on everyday people, if I could call them this,
Yeah.
um, is something that our School for the Future of Innovation in Society and also CISPO in Washington, D.C., ASU's think tank, has been trying to champion. How do you do that at scale? So it's one
Yeah.
thing to have conversations, for example, as my children were growing up, the conversations with mums at the swimming pools were to me so important, and they were down to earth, they were frank, they were
Yeah.
open and honest, and I wasn't sitting there collecting data, nor were they collecting data on me. It was more about what do you feel about these things? How does
Yeah.
it affect you? And it would come up in conversation with me without me having to prompt anything. It would just be a
Yeah.
natural conversation. And if it's on their radar, that's important.
Yeah.
If it's on a mum and dad who's taken their kids to swimming lessons radar, then it's a topic of conversation that has political legs, but also is socioeconomically driven in some way to impact them. Um, but how do you do that at scale? We've run town halls where we look at underrepresented minorities, vulnerable communities, making sure they get to our town halls. But how would you do that on scale? Do you think, you know, any thoughts from you? Because I actually agree with you. Our school would agree with you that sentiment needs to be collected from so many other people, not just the experts, not just the politicians, not just the industry leaders. How do you do that?
Um, it's well, it's an excellent question to which probably you would earn millions if anyone had a very good answer. You have to go to the communities first. You have to be talking to these people, keeping your eyes and ears always open and not necessarily again. I think the key, really, let me rephrase it, is being open-minded. You cannot go there with preconception. Okay, it's not like really a targeted interview or A/B testing. It's not like, oh, do you want this shade of green or slightly? It has to be really, listen. They will use different words. They will go off track. They'll give you a lot of parentheses. They'll be talking about their grandmother, but within that, you will get something where they actually, you know what, that sentence that they said, and it takes time. Again, it takes, and then sometimes you just also have to probe them in a way that, hey, you know what? This is what I think about this technology, but I'm doubting. What do you think? In the moment you ask for their opinion, I'm not yet, I haven't met anyone who would not be able to share their opinion or advice. People love giving advice. People love their sharing opinions. So if you say, look, I'm thinking about, I'm thinking about buying this or that. What do you think? Here it goes. It's a life, they will spend their time. They will share their wisdom.
Yeah. we looked at where there were pockets of communities in the States, for example, and we thought about venturing with permission and with full disclosure and IRB approval, Internal Review Board approval of the university, how to reach uh, religious organizations, organizations that do volunteerism for different purposes, um, groups of people as they self-organize and cluster. And of course, these groups, are easily identifiable and have felt burnout as well from this kind of interaction. They sort of want to be
Mm,
left alone to do their thing, and it's more what we are talking about is more the organic way of um, figuring out what people are thinking and where they're at with technological opportunities. But it is something that I think needs further investigation. Could be someone's PhD, literally, to
mhm,
look at how this can happen. And of course, we can look at different large-scale organizations like Mission Publics coming out of France from memory that look at how they can do this at scale and collect data, but also allow uh, individuals within the setting in situ that are the leaders within those groups to run those kinds of fact-finding investigations, or, as you said, fluid, very open, and not A/B testing. It's really a conversation um,
mm.
with groups that are affinity groups. Let's call them like that. I do remember a social marketer in Australia by the name of Hugh Mackay trying to do these kinds of investigations where they go in and they won't even have a topic that's listed for discussion, and the focus group and affinity group will just begin to talk. And they would use this kind of thing to look at political sentiment or sentiment that might influence where someone may be more cognizant to vote, for instance, but they would do it so fluidly that they wouldn't even put a statement on the board. It would just be come in, be together,
Mm.
and talk. And of course, they had ethics approval to do this. But these affinity groups are very interesting as a way to study communities of interest, but also where they see themselves going and how they practice.
Yeah.
Um, so thank you for that response. It is insightful. One of the other things that we've learned is people need to be remunerated for their time. And we're not good at doing that. Unfortunately, as academics, the funds from grant bodies don't allow us to remunerate a participant, and that money has to come from somewhere else. But then you see these gifts of $10, but you've been there for 1 hour or 2 hours. And I think this is a shortcoming when we start to look at, well, that should be equivalent to an expert's 1 hour. And what is that figure? But that's just a symbolic figure. What else happens? What else in this two-way feedback loop, if I could say that? Um, the other thing I wanted to touch on while we are talking about citizens and everyday persons is how open are these TIAs and how accessible are these? So yes, we listen and we hear from many different stakeholder types, but how open are these TIAs? Does it depend on the sponsor? And how accessible is the language in the TIAs to support people's understanding?
Yeah, so that's the key. I think that's where I would say we're not doing a great job collectively. I think generally TIA and the expert community tends to be overly complex. You read a lot of papers and I'm sure you had experience where you read the pages, 20 pages, where you could say, well, it's just literally 2 paragraphs where the message is. And average person, the average citizen will not read a 20 pages academic paper to understand. So it has to be um, simple, it has to be understood, it has to be practical. Now, the insight that you collect then can be translated to more complex language that can be synthesized for expert consumption. But very often it does not really, it doesn't really translate the other way around. Um, and then even within the expert community, very often there is there are different expert communities. So the language that is being used between the expert community sometimes is also very, very different. Some of the organizations that are very formalized and have to follow a certain set of rules be it the government or international organizations. Now they have their own, and depending on technology or depending on stage of negotiation or depending on the public discourse, even a simple set of words can really mean a very loaded message. Now, to an average citizen, that's just a lost cause, right? They would not accept it. So when they use this, literally two words combined together, they just mean what they mean. But in the negotiator's mind, oh my God, means 20 countries will just veto my resolution, or this and that. So it also has to be understood from that perspective.
Very good. And the openness, do you think TIAs are always open, or sometimes they need to be behind closed doors for particular intelligence communities or defense communities, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think there's certain areas where by definition they should be somewhat restricted to, but it's also then it's to the consciousness of those communities that they need to decide whether certain things that they will learn or discuss need to be brought to the broader public, right? It can't be just, oh, it's so classified, it's so scary that we just don't share it. It has to be a broader debate because, again, even within those close communities, there could be a group think. They may be misunderstanding something, they may be miscalculating something, or in the country, again, it could be a very highly politicized environment where they may understand or everything perfectly, but they would just not be in a position to, present it in a pure quote unquote civil service way, and would have to follow some sort of a political agenda.
In terms of the main stakeholders, you've mentioned so many already. Could you summarize for us who are the main stakeholders of a technology impact assessment?
Society. I mean, it's the technology affects the society, right? Sooner or later, technology will penetrate every single layer of the society. Some of us will get access to it first, some others will get later. But at the end of the day, technology is shaped by society and is shaping the society. So, in a way, there are people like you and me that are very interested in that. They are passionate about it. Those companies that produce it, researchers that are studying this, the ethicists of technology, it became very fashionable thing right now. The ethics of this, the ethics of that. But at the end of the day, if you look at the underlying assumption of any ethics research, is that exactly that technology assessment, right? What the impact it will have, whether it will be ethical or not. So in a way, it becoming, I would say, mainstreamed really in our consciousness, just because technology now penetrates every walk of life. In the past, when it was a nuclear power plant somewhere, it was far, it was removed. You may have strong opinion one way or another, but it's not. But when the technology is here in your pocket every day, it's a very different environment. So, as much as it's hard to go to your earlier point to do it at scale, there
Mhm.
should be some sort of everybody's entitled to an opinion. However, again, those opinion, you have to be very cognizant that now in the current information age, many of those opinions are exactly that. They're not well informed. They're jerk knee reaction. They are maybe manipulated opinions and so on.
This leads to the question on the usability of TIAs, for example, for government engagement, for decision making, particularly with an emphasis on peace and stability. Do you think, given what you just said, TIAs can be used as perhaps decision-making tools, as we alluded to earlier, or that they have a function that a body can say, like a government, yep, we can see that this is evidence-based and we can make some decisions based on the recommendations from a TIA. How do you see that interplay? Is it effective? Is it an effective instrument?
I think so. I think a lot of governments in my work around the world, a lot of governments, but also non-governmental organizations, particularly from global south, they have they always look to quote unquote global north where those technology have been developed, but they also look at it from a point of view that with suspicion somewhat, right? We are being sold. Yeah, we are being vendor lock-in where, but at the same time, they're eager, they're curious, they want to learn, right? So they are constantly looking for quote unquote neutral, or not even neutral, but impartial. Yeah, because, and they make those distinction very clearly because I am pro AI. I like AI. I cannot be neutral about it, but I can be impartial which AI it is and how it is, right? So in a way, there is constant need for many actors around the world for that exactly that impartial technology impact assessment, because they're as if you have three people in your ministry that are dedicated to this topic and they're overworked, it's impossible to follow all the articles, to attend every meeting and so on. And maybe there's some sort of even cultural barriers where the people in the know may struggle to convey those messages and that knowledge up or down or sideways. Um, but um, so it can be really serve as a tool to get to common ground, to say, look, it's without going into the political technology transfer or all that stuff, but kind of just to say, look, yeah, generally this is good. There are some side effects. Let's work on that, but this is what the quote unquote the global opinion about this is.
And on that note, do you see TIAs being conducted by independent consultants who are impartial? For example, should they be conducted by an agency within a government context, an organization who's a chief sponsor from industry? Who conducts TIAs, and can you give us some examples?
Um, you know, in the TIA can come in different forms as long as it comes from a trusted, and very often it's not even an organization; it's a person. It normally starts with one expert, and then becomes groups of experts, and they all know each other, and they kind of develop the code of conduct and everything, and then slowly there builds a more professional approach to where there's a set of standards that one has to follow and so on. So it could be an independent agency. It could um, be some sort of international. Well, the technology impact assessment is done at manual levels. Like even a small mom and pop shop has someone who normally assesses and buys and procures technology or fixes things when they go wrong. So as things mature and the organization grows in complexity, there will be different ways. I think there is a function also to be made around some sort of audit of those independent assessments as well. So but again, I'm biased because I sit on the independent oversight committees of various organizations where you have to, you have to again ask intelligence questions. Have you thought it through? Try to make it a connection from previous experience, from other collective intelligence sources and so on.
And TIAs, Danil, are they cross-sectional, or do they follow a technology's lifetime in a particular given context? How do you see TIAs? Are they a continuous process? Are they a one-off process? And where does it happen in perhaps the technology's life cycle?
It should ideally it should be continuously, but it shouldn't be in a way kind of a forced. Or yet again, where I just did it 2 months ago. Why am I being asked to do it again? And it shouldn't be kind of just a tick the box exercise where 96% of the report is copy paste and then you just change the date and maybe a few words. It shouldn't be that. It should be, yeah, it should be, it should come from a point of view of interest and not fear, but also kind of always try to now with the um, in the light of new knowledge or new information, new data, or new scenario that happened halfway across the world. how would I assess myself, right? This and that, yeah, I myself always change my opinion about things that, if I read my papers from 10 years ago, like, things have changed. So, but you're very convinced at the moment, and that's why it should be continuum. It should be evolving convincement.
And we're exploring um, bilateral and multilateral TIAs, but if we just stick to bilateral for a moment, do you think there is a use? Let's say it's an independent consultant working in the US. Can they be in a bilateral context working with an Indian counterpart or an Australian counterpart to conduct a TIA? And how might that look in practice? When you say joint TIA, what does that mean to you, if anything?
Well, if it's a joint, it has to be then conducted by, at the very least, two parties. But if you bring in independent consultant, three parties, right? You may even expand that because I think it's absolutely feasible and actually very, very useful, right? Because if you do it independently, you're not really taking a point of view of either one, right? Now, yeah, again, there is always the political connotation. You may end up in a situation where you upset both or one or or none. But that if it's done independently, just basically do it in a proper way. You say, look, this is what the data shows after everything that I've done in XYZ. I'm happy to be convinced otherwise, but this is basically my conclusion of after a certain period of digging deeper in this.
So it would be two independent TIAs or three, for example, as we just mentioned, and then people sharing their outcomes to come to a joint decision or joint view, perhaps, uh, with respect to a given technology.
Yeah, and then I mean, obviously, you would need to think through whether you want to foresee a joint view, or you're happy to say, what, at the end of the day, we agree to disagree. That's perfectly acceptable outcome. And again, it's maybe there's an element where you can say, look, we are happy with this conclusion now, but we may not be happy 2 months. And therefore, there's some sort of a mechanism of revision or feeding back and saying, actually, you know what? Um, our conclusion actually does not pan out after meeting the test of reality. Perhaps we should go back. There may be some sort of a mistaken calculation somewhere along the line.
Yes. Do you think that discussions like these and joint TIAs can lead to sustained peace and stability in the world?
Yes, I do believe that. I'm a strong believer. The more you talk, as long as you can talk, you can agree. When you don't talk, that's when the paranoia kicks in, and that's where the real suspicion starts creeping in. If you maintain the dialogue, even if you don't like what you hear, it's still, I think, in my book, a better scenario.
Yes, I agree with you both for the processes we're talking about and even personal relations. I think it's very true on both counts. In terms of the types of technologies we should be focused on, countries come out with, the top 10 critical emerging technologies. Do you think something like that exists for all nation states? Do you think we should be identifying them on a list? And perhaps I should ask you, what should be on the list? You mentioned quantum a second ago, but um, how do you understand what are critical emerging technologies for countries?
So this is an excellent question. My former employee, World Economic Forum, every year comes up with the 10 emerging technologies, right? And it's very interesting list to read through. It's just a good exercise, because some of them are actually quite old ideas, some of them are recycled ideas, but some of them are quite completely new, right? And they're for countries, I think it's hard to say for countries because I'm not really I'm never envious of the central planning colleagues because every ministry will look at the same technology from very different perspectives, right? It could be, if it could be a tool for economic development, it could be for security enhancement, it could be this and that, or so. It could be job creation, it could be job disruption, it could be efficiency enhancing, you name it. So even within the country where the critical technology is, it's hard to define. Even within that, since you bring the quantum, quantum is such a broad field, right? We have been using quantum technology for decades. MRI is a quantum technology. Is it critical for countries? Of course, it's critical for healthcare. Should we all now start building quantum internet? If you have a capacity, be my guest, but not, if you have very hard choices where to spend your money on, whether it's education, feeding defeating hunger or this and that, probably quantum internet can wait. So those allocations are important.
Coming back to TIA as an instrument, do you see shortcomings or limitations of the instrument, or potential even misuse? Is it possible?
Of a TIA.
Yes.
Yeah, of course. I mean, TIA can be hijacked for commercial purposes or for this and that purposes. It can be, again, it can be abused where a party that has a stronger command of the subject matter will just utilize it for whatever purposes. But at the same time, again, I find it's a very useful tool because it starts with questions. It does not, technology, it questions technology. It just doesn't come up with like, here's your answer. It
Mhm.
actually starts with questions. And by that, it's already very, very useful too.
Well, Danil Kerimi, we've come to the end of the interview. It's just been an hour or so we've been talking. Is there anything else you wish to add that you didn't get an opportunity to talk about, or something that you wanted to elaborate on further?
No, it's nothing I would like to add except that I wish you all very best in this very, very interesting project. I do look forward to reading your report or whatever conclusion you decide to do it in terms of videos and so on. And yeah, no, thank you for reaching out. It's been tremendously interesting conversation.
Well, thank you for your time and your wisdom and your intellect. I will be going back to that bio of yours as a way to inspire students to become lifelong learners. But good luck with your PhD. I look forward to reading the outcomes of that work, and the very best to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have a great
Thank you.
day.
Thank you too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.